Welcome to Rote Reviews. We've got a fairly dark episode today, so I'm going to warn you up front. We're discussing a film that portrays visually violence, murder, and suicide. So if you can't handle conversation and heavy racism, if you can't handle those conversations, know that I love you very much, and I ask you to go ahead and leave this video. Just like us and come back, because I promise we'll do something light very soon.
Like next.
Those of you who are going to stick around, we're reviewing Moffie. A young man in the 1981 South Africa must complete his brutal and racist 2 years of compulsory military service while desperately maintaining the secrecy of his homosexuality. That's the blurb. I'm going to jump right into what I thought, because I have thoughts on this one. It does not get billed as a gay movie. That had nothing to do with the plot, almost nothing.
I would argue that, but go ahead.
It doesn't really have much to do with war either. It has to go on the shelf, and pardon my analog reference, but on the shelf labeled, "These are the atrocities humans commit upon one another. Let's never let them happen again."
Mm-hmm. Very much.
That's where this film belongs. And now after that, let's actually talk about it.
Okay, so here are my things about it. Having been politically active during the apartheid era and being very much against it for obvious reasons, I have to say here's what I think Moffie suffers from the most, and this is not spoilery in any real way. Moffie suffers from what I often say about queer foreign films, in that when they make a film that has any queer representation, I tend to notice they tend to be slices of life. They neither have a real beginning or a real tidy end. They're just, this is what happened. And they drop it at the end, and you kind of go, okay. Moffie is very much in that vein and almost on steroids, which I think hurts the film tremendously. Not that I need every question neatly tied in a bow and be all pretty, because I'm not that kind of person. But I think in this case, the way that it wraps itself up is left too open. Mm-hmm. You don't get any resolution. And while I understand your comment about it's not a gay movie, I would argue that it is. But what I argue is that coming from that era in 1981, even here, and obviously this is not South Africa, but even here, the love that dare not speak its name, it was a really harsh environment, no matter where you were in the world, if you were queer.
Let me explain
but in this masculine sexualized environment of conscripted apartheid service, and that's where the evil is. Mm-hmm. The evil and maliciousness of this story really revolves around Nick's character. Go ahead.
Can we just say it revolves around state-sanctioned violence and murder?
Yes. Well, that's what the conscripted army was for.
Mm-hmm.
We should also let people know that a good portion of the film, at least half of it, is spoken in Afrikaans, which is a language, a kind of a Dutch sort of language, and African languages kind of meshed together.
It's a Dutch
pidgin. I did some
pidgin.
research on the languages of that area, and it's the third most spoken language in that country. And what it really kind of pointed out to me, and this is not spoiler again, is that, man, imperialism fucking sucks.
Yes.
And so this movie really shows that.
Yes, I'm going to circle back to your comment about this not really being a gay film. The reason I said that, Nick, the main character, is passive 99% of the time. Things happen to him. And I understand he's just trying to survive. I saw that clear as day. He makes one attempt at touching another male. One. He has one.
And it's after he's out of service.
At the end when he's out of his service. One active moment in the entire character's portrayal. One. I think he's questioning, absolutely, no doubt about it. I don't think I cannot put him in the queer camp.
I can because of the flashback to when he was a boy and got caught watching another man shower and was, according to the other guy, playing with himself. I think there's enough of a throughput there. I mean, he gave up the girly magazine without even thinking about it to get the picture back of his dad. So to me, it was like, okay, he's definitely queer. He doesn't, but I think for him, his arrival at who he was starting to become and starting to understand was eclipsed by this hyper masculine society that completely crushed any further development. And the fact that he went after Stassman, I can't remember his last name, but the guy who kissed him and actively wanted to know where he was and then eventually found him in the end, only to have that part crushed. Again, that points to me that it's beyond questioning. I think the one thing I took away from it when he was laying on the beach in the end, and I know this is sort of spoiler, so spoiler alert.
It's a spoiler. I'm going to spoil it if you don't. So
yeah, I think he at that moment, even though what he had hoped for didn't seem to be panning out, I think he was okay with himself. He had arrived at some level of, well, this is who I am. Interestingly enough, within about 7 or 8 years later, historically, conscription came to an end. So, it's one of those cases of, man, if I was only born 10 years later, I might have avoided all of this, kind of thing. And that's kind of, to me, what Moffie represents. It is definitely a what if scenario situation. If he had not been born in that time, would his adjustment to who he is have been much cleaner, much less obstructed, much less having to deal with toxic masculinity so much because of the environment of conscription? And it was clear that conscription was awful anyways, because there's a sequence where someone really can't handle it anymore, and it is quite a violent and abrupt moment in the film. And so I think more than anything, it shows the evils of racism, but it also shows the evils of toxic masculinity in those kinds of environments. So on that case, I think it was worthy, although this is definitely not a feel-good movie. It's definitely not a feel-good movie. In fact, as I was watching, I turned to my husband at one point, I go, man, I can only hear what Vance is probably thinking about this. And he's like, why? And I said, I know. I said, having watched how he's rated a few films, I said,
yep.
Okay, you go back to you.
I'm not sure I have much else to say. I'm going to just give it a big warning. I'm also going to give it this needs to exist. Do not get me wrong. I am not upset that I saw it. I'm not upset that it was made. It belongs in a very special segment of the library where we do not forget what we did to each other as human beings.
Yes.
Every element of that needs to still be there. That said, do not watch it 2 hours before you were to take your 9-year-old niece for hamburgers, ice cream, and a walk through a nature preserve. Because it will mess you up.
Yeah. I think, in fact, the one thing I turned and said to my husband, I turned to Jay and I said, this is not an advertisement to come visit us in South Africa. That movie really kind of just said, you're better where you are. I don't care where you are. You're better where you are.
Yeah. And I wanted to give the director a lot of credit for showing the atrocities, which is a horrible thing to say. Unflinchingly. There's a scene where Nick is placed into battle on the border of Angola and has to shoot someone for the first time. And he watches that person die. And the director caught the look of terror and revulsion and self-hatred in Nick for what he had just done, while this man is gasping at his feet. Props to the director that this director did not shy away from the realities. And I looked at the reviews afterward, and people who had actually lived in South Africa during the time said that the film was not violent enough, if that says anything. So, like I said, very specific section of the library.
And the thing is, I agree with you about Nick's lack of agency. He was just trying to get through it.
He was surviving. I get that.
But I think that part of it is him witnessing the horrors of some of his mates that were in his company and how easily they gave into racism and bought into it. And the look of like, oh my God, yeah, they are like this, aren't they? And there's this realization that comes upon them in a sequence where they find the 5 kids and the one guy just raises his rifle and they have to tell him, put your rifle down. You know, but it was so easy for him to hold it on 5 children, you know, and yeah, that part of it is just, you know, so it is a tough film to watch. Why don't you go ahead and give your rating breakdown, and then I'll give mine.
I gave the overall production a 4. Again, mostly for its fearlessness and showing the topic, but the locations were authentic. I have traveled the world as well, so things like the clothing and the houses, I mean, that was all real. They didn't have sets. They used real places. Kudos to them for that one. Screenplay, I gave a 2. And Baz, I know you had mentioned this before we started. The film is in 2 languages on purpose because South Africa has multiple languages. Nick is actually English descended, though born in South Africa. So he spoke English most of the time, but his mates spoke Afrikaans. And when that was happening, you would get subtitles. And so there was this mental disconnect between listening to English and then suddenly reading subtitles.
Yeah. And that's partially because, as I looked up in the research for the film, Afrikaans was the official language of the conscripted army, which is why you have that duality. Although there's nothing that prepares you for that. When you know, it would have been nice if the dad had said when he gave him the porn magazine, "Hey, how's your Afrikaans?" You know, you're going to have to speak that, right? You know, and that's that would have been at least a little line, that would have given us a clue. Oh, we've got multiple languages in here, you know.
I do feel that the script didn't give the viewer enough to be prepared for some of the stuff that happened. So I gave it a 2.
And it took you out.
It did. It knocked me out several times. Sound, lighting, score. I remember the lighting being really dark in some places, like to where I had to wonder if I had to turn up the light just on my television, like the brightness. The score actually was fine. I kind of wanted to separate that one out because I didn't notice it, which meant it did its job, meaning it probably heightened my emotions in the background, but it didn't jar in any way. Art direction, costuming, I gave that a 4. Again, like I said, the sets, the clothing, everything on point. That one's good. Casting, a 3. I thought there may have been a couple of the character choices that were just kind of like, didn't sit well with me.
Okay.
Directing, 3.5. Again, I thought the director was fearless, but I felt that they just didn't prepare the viewer enough for what they were about to see. Queer themes represented, 2. Like I said, sure, it was there, but that's not what this film was about. This film was about state-sanctioned violence, and
I at least like they didn't bury Nick at the end. That he didn't die. He didn't. Which of that era could have definitely been a thing.
I gave it a 2 and not a 0.5. So my overall rating, when you average those, was 2.5. Okay. I probably will not watch it again unless there's a racist or homophobe in my house asking what we should watch.
Under the guise of "Hello, pot." Okay, so mine a little bit more generous, and I'll explain why. I thought the overall production is a 5, and the reason why, and it actually goes to your art direction point. What I liked about the way it looked and the lighting, and it was very if you go back to films from that era and before in the 70s, taking Star Wars out of the mix and Star Trek out of the mix because they were very, very visually pretty to look at. Films from the late 60s or mid 60s through the early 80s were all very, very muted colors, very, very, there was almost a wash to them. And I thought that was spot on for the era that they were portraying. So for me, the overall production gets a 5, just because they nailed the year 1981 in so many ways, production-wise. Sound, I gave it a 3. And oddly enough, because I'm Mr. Score, I love scores for movies, this one made me grit my teeth, because the first thing that hit me was there's a movie called The Favor, which hopefully we'll review. It's dealing with Queen Anne, who was a suspected lesbian. And in that one, there is a score that when the monotony of court, things that are just, there's nothing going on, they would have this ticking that would go on, and 2 notes on a cello, bum, 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 and it would just drone on. As soon as I heard that in the beginning of Moffie, I was like, oh no, not another one of those kind of scores. So I really noticed it, because it, and that's due to the fact that in The Favorite, it was so out in front that the moment I heard that kind of dissonant kind of, score, I immediately got taken out of the movie, because I'm like, oh no, it's going to be one of those kind of scores. So that's why I gave it a 3. Art direction, I really loved it. The clothes were spot on. The costume was spot on. The coloring of the film, the color grade of the film, totally spot on with that period. I think the cast I gave 5, and that I liked the choices they made. I think for that period of time, they got the guys to really look and behave the way I remembered the 1980s being, and being a queer person in around, because, I'm in a Navy town. And so I see that hyper masculinized, toxic masculinity thing. It's just a thing here. And so it reminded me of my youth in that way. So I liked the casting. The direction, I gave a 4. And that's because I thought it was uneven at times. There were times, and I love cinema verite. Don't take me wrong. I like when the camera tells a story and there's nobody talking. I like that. I like the camera to tell me a story as well. I like it to be a character. But in this case, I thought there were pieces that were just really uneven. Like there were some points where they would take you someplace and you're like, okay, what's up with that? Why is that in there? It didn't need, there were some things I thought I questioned, did they really need to be in the film? So that's why I knocked that one. Queer representation, I gave it a 4 only because, like I said, I lived through that period as a young queer man. And so there were many things in the way that it happened in the film that even though I wasn't conscripted into an army, it brought feelings back of what it was like for me in that era. So I was more on point with that one, giving it a slightly higher number than you did. Writing, again, I thought it was uneven. And interestingly enough, I just noticed that the guy who wrote the book that this was based on, his character's actually him, the guy who wrote it. There's a character with his name. I don't know if it's him, but there is a character with his name in the movie itself. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that it's written about Nick, who is this young queer man getting through conscription, and yet there's another boy in that company that has the same name as the author of the book and the screenplay. So I was kind of like, what's that about? Why didn't we get it from his perspective? I don't know. It was a little strange. Right. And then so my personal was about 3.5. I just thought it was good. Like you, I agree. It has its place. It's something that you definitely need to see about the evils that men do. It is hyper masculinized. It is not if you want to watch a movie that celebrates the equality of spirit in both masculine and feminine, this is not that movie.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
So, after this, you want to go watch something really light and fluffy.
Mhm.
Watch a Scooby-Doo episode afterwards. Anyways, so those are my pull, the way I felt about it. And so, yeah, I'll put our ratings up. I'll also put up the Rotten Tomatoes and the IMDb as of this recording. And we will then you'll get a well-rounded review on the movie that we just talked about, Moffie. And by the way, Moffie, in case we didn't explain it, Moffie is an Afrikaans term for a gay man. It's basically equivalent to faggot.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's our review of Moffie. If there's a movie that you guys want us to review, something that came out that maybe you're not so sure if you want to watch it and you'd like us to see it and review it and give you some feedback, definitely put it down in the comments. Remember to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. And we're going to be hitting up another movie next week. Vance, do we have an idea what it is?
It's probably going to be a documentary, actually. I'm torn between Visible, out in television, or We're Here. Do you want to make choice? No, I gave you two. Pick one. Here on air in front of everyone.
Visible is probably a really good base point for people because it also talks about other queer productions. So you get a better idea of what's available out there. One of the complaints I have about a lot of people who review queer media, it's always the same films. What we're striving to do is talk about the films that aren't so talked about, but are out there. They're options for you. And I think Visible is really great because it takes you through the visibility of queer people in productions, in real life, and throughout time. So they start and they do one for each decade from the late 50s, early 60s to the present. So it's a really good perspective, long perspective on queerdom as it evolved in the media. So.
Then that's what we're doing.
Okay, Visible. All right. So like, subscribe, tell your friends. And if there's a movie you want or a TV series you want us to review because you're curious about it, but don't know if you want to invest the time, hey, put it down in the comments and we'll definitely consider it and get it up there for you. All right. Until then, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.